Okay, we're ready to go.
Very good. I'm going to call this meeting of the Infrastructure Bond Engagement Steering Committee for the City of Salem to order. It's Friday, June 10th, and Kelly, could you call the roll?
Yes, Member Hoy.
Here.
Member Stapleton.
Here.
Member Varney.
Here.
Member Gonzalez.
Here.
Chair Bennett.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. We need to approve the last or the 4:15 minutes.
I move approval of the April 15th, 2022 minutes.
Second.
Great. Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, I have one person signed up for public comment. Phil Carver. Phil?
Hello, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have two quick comments. So I won't take my full 3 minutes. The first comment is that Councillor Hoy, you said that you didn't want to get in the council meeting, you didn't want to get involved in engineering decisions by the city engineers, and whether to have a safety feature on a road is not an engineering decision, it's a policy decision. And it's up to the policymakers to decide what level of safety. And an example is the 12th Street. The city staff proposed a 4-lane road for 12th Street, and that was the neighbors protested, and it was back down to a 2-lane road that is there now. So don't be afraid to get involved in policy decisions. The costs and estimates of the process, the safety issues can be estimated by the engineers, but the decision is yours. And the second is that there are other areas where the Salem Bike Vision can be funded, and you should look outside just the transportation budgets. An example is the Gear Sports Field. That's a regional sports field, and there's several $1 million there to just extend the season on the sports field. It's a lot of money for very little benefit. You should look through all the different projects, and there are quite a few that do not have nearly the benefit to the citizens, especially in terms of safety, as the Salem Bike Vision. And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Any questions for Phil? Okay, thank you again. Let me see, move us on here. Okay, we've got some information on the public opinion community research. So Courtney, is that you? You're off.
Courtney.
You're off right now.
Hi. Thankfully, Mayor Bennett, we have an expert among us. We have John Horvick from DHM Research, who put together the poll and fielded it for us and has top line results that were in your packet for today.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask John to just walk us through, because I defer to John entirely. Thank you.
Okay, great. John, you want to go ahead? Nice to see you. John,
Mr. Horvick, you're also on mute.
John, are you there?
Got it. I'm
Okay.
here. Do I have the right thing up? I do. Okay. This is, bear with me for 1 second as I get things up. All right. So I'm going to walk through this. These are really fresh numbers. So I'm going to set some context. These are going to be high level overall results. I haven't had a chance to really dig too much into the demographic differences yet. This is a working report. And so I'm interested both in telling you to the top level numbers that we've seen and your feedback so that we can do the appropriate analysis that's going to be helpful for you. The one bit that I did pull out for this is around the differences by geography, by ward. There are other key differences that may be relevant as well. I made a choice for today to call that out, but it's not the only thing that might be relevant. I'm going to do my best to be clear as I walk through this. But of course, if I'm not being, will you please pause me and ask questions, because I want to make sure you're following along. So research purpose, words go here, meaning this is a working deck. So ignore that. but we did want to assess voter support for potential community improvement bond and evaluate project priorities. This was really a survey that was intended to ask directly about the bond, what's going to go into the bond in terms of larger sets of buckets of spending, as well as specific signature projects. We asked a couple questions about sentiment, how people are feeling about the bond, thinking about the bond. This was not a messaging communication survey, right? That's not the intent. We didn't try to push people one way or the other with sorts of different questions around communications. We didn't try to identify potential roadblocks. We really wanted to give you information about how voters are thinking about the potential package. If there are things that maybe bring down support, things that elevate support, so you can make your final decisions. All right. How did we do this? This is a hybrid survey. I've said this before, but people participate in research or use their phones really in different ways. And so some people still want to be contacted with a live interviewer, and we reach out to people that way. Other folks don't want to be contacted with a live interviewer and prefer just to get a text message, and they take the survey on their smartphones, or they can throw it to another device if they prefer. Because those differences exist in the community, we reach people in different ways. So this is a hybrid survey we call that uses both phone, traditional phone, and text online. We reached 425 voters in the city of Salem. This was conducted, it says month here, again, excuse the sort of the working aspect of this, but this was conducted in May from the 25th to 28th. So this is really fresh data. The sample was modeled to match the demographic turnout of the November 2022 election by age, gender, education, race, ward, and political party. Okay, so this is not all registered voters, it's not all adults. We tried to match it to look like the electorate that will be there in November. Margin of error is 4.8%. You might see some things off by 1% due to rounding. Any questions about what we did before I move on?
Nope.
Okay. All right. So we usually start with some sort of question to get at voter mood. We often will ask right direction, wrong track. We've done that recently. We'll probably do it again in the community survey, the next round of community survey work. So we wanted to ask something different. This was about just quality of life in the city of Salem. So this is about kind of how they're feeling individually rather than how they're feeling about, say, the city of Salem itself. And 65% say that they're satisfied with their quality of life. 22% said they're strongly satisfied. 43% said they're somewhat satisfied. So you're about 2 out of 3 voters saying that they're satisfied with the quality of life in Salem. We did ask a follow-up question, just what is the most important issue? This is open-ended. This is a question we've asked in previous surveys for you. You know, we see that consistent theme of all the comments that people made. 60% had something to do with homelessness or poverty. Poverty is really framed as you know, conditions around homelessness, and that's the highest we've measured. So that's a persistent problem that voters are seeing in the community. 12% said crime or drugs or something related to that. Then you see things further down the list. 9% something to do with the environment, 8% affordable housing. If you combine affordable housing with homelessness, you're at 68%. There are distinct issues, but you could think of, you know, you're at 2/3 of voters are saying something to do with housing. Then you can see the other issues down below. With a question like this, I always encourage folks to observe what people say, but also what they say infrequently. And you probably will each sort of draw different conclusions about what people don't say. But I just, as a consumer of information, a consumer of survey data like this, it's important to pay attention to both.
John, I have a question on one of them.
Yeah.
The level of concern about inflation, gas prices, and cost of living. We see nationally really substantial reaction to that, and here it's very low. How is that differentiated?
Yeah, so it's the same thing. If we would have asked a national survey, you could think of this. It's a good observation, Mayor. If we would have asked, what's the most important issue for your national leaders to do something about? Inflation would have been at the top or very near it. We see that consistently in national surveys, and homelessness would have been pretty low. It has to do with, in part, which level of government that they see responsible for the thing that they're concerned about. And when we ask them, what's the most important problem in Salem, they're thinking about the city, they're thinking about their local elected officials, and they're not necessarily saying that is specifically a local issue, where they are saying specifically homelessness is a local issue, crime is a local issue. But we know for sure that cost of living, inflation are big concerns for voters right now. And I will say there is a connection between homelessness in it's a multidimensional issue, and the cost of living for in voters' minds, and I just think in fact. But you're right to notice that. I would say the other thing that's kind of not on here, this isn't the purpose of today, but education. Education's been crowded out by other issues. Historically, it's always been a top, first or second issue when we ask locally, and it's just not right now. And it's not unique to Salem. That's something we're observing across the state. We could do a whole sort of thing on that, but that's something else that's really shown lately.
Yeah, I just wondered too, because with inflation and the cost of gas and all the rest of it, how amenable are folks to voting for $300 million worth of bond?
It's a good question. Of course, we asked directly in the survey. Just one sort of set of context. This isn't the full picture, but we just had elections in May. There were 57 local funding measures on the ballot in May across the state. 2/3 of them passed. Since the pandemic, 2/3 to 70% of all local funding measures across the state have passed. That's not to say what's going to happen next November. It doesn't mean what voters are going to do in Salem, but at least in this most recent election, where inflation was certainly on voters' minds, it didn't translate into a particularly low rate of success for local funding measures, for whatever that's worth.
That's helpful. Thank you.
So then we did the initial ballot test. We tried to use language that would be, best as we understand it, consistent with what would be on the actual ballot. So the number of words, the language that's required around the constitutional language. And so you can see, I got to move my screen a little bit here. This is the language we asked. Shall the city of Salem issue up to $300 million in general obligations bonds for streets, fire equipment, parks, and public safety? This is language that's consistent with other bond measures that Salem has had on the ballot, swapping out the specifics of this bond. And then if the bonds are approved, they'll be payable property taxes and all that sort of stuff. This is all required language for a measure like this. So we tried to do a real test of what voters might see in that title. We start at 46% yes, 30%, 39% no. It's always important to pay attention to the certain yeses and the certain no's. I'll be honest with you, we should all be clear-eyed with this. We'd like this number to be more. Okay, but hold on, because the next question is, I'll give people a little bit, oh, excuse me, before we get to the next question, here's just how it is by ward. Again, overall 46%. You can see, I ignore this. I don't think this is right. Ignore this. I'm going to skip over it. Like this, it should be, I'll do this in the way that's going to make sense here in a second. So then we asked, or we told people, the measure would replace existing bond payments. So we're giving voters a little bit more information. If passed, property tax rates would stay at their current rates. So we gave people that critical piece of information. In the focus groups we did last year, in the survey we did earlier this year, every time that we've asked voters in the community about this potential bond measure, they have started skeptical. A big part of their skepticism is concern about rising taxes. Once we inform voters that tax rates would stay steady, support increases. And we see that again here. So we go from 46% to 54% on the yes vote. No voted went from 39 to 32. But look at this, the certain no was 27%, And then once we tell voters, hey, you're going to get this important community public infrastructure without tax rates increasing, and now we're just at 10% certain to vote no. Yes, Councilor Hoy.
Thank you, John. I think that's a great shift on the certain no's. I'm concerned about the shift on the certain yeses, though. Why did it actually go down a little?
It's 1 percentage point, so it's probably a voter. I don't know. I would like it to go in the other direction too. We do multiple tests, so let's pay attention to where this certain goes once we give people more information. But you're right. I would like that certain yes to be higher than 22%, no doubt. Okay, so here I just got my slide out of order. Here is after this informed test. This is where support is across the city. And I'll admit, I don't have a good mental map in my head of where each ward is. So you probably have a better.
Excuse me.
6 is you. Well, there you go, Councilor Hoy. You're at 72%. This pattern, you're going to see some shifts as we go through it, but this general pattern is going to be consistent across the city. Keep in mind, we're at 425 people in our sample, divided by roughly 8. Not every ward has exact number of voters. So the margins of error for each one of these wards is pretty large. But because we see a pretty consistent pattern, and the projects that are going to be funded and acted on are, geographically bound. And so I thought for today you might be interested in seeing these differences. Yes, Councilor Hoy.
Thanks, John. This is really fascinating to me because we know I have the most diverse ward in the city, and probably, if not the second lowest income. And then Ward 2 is I think the highest income. And so it's fascinating that is that consistent with your findings in other surveys where the lower income places are more likely to vote for something like this?
So I don't know for Salem. In the Salem in the past, I haven't broken out by ward. I've broken out some different way. I did it this way to give you more specific information. I will say these are broad strokes that diverse communities tend to be more liberal, generally speaking, and liberal voters tend to be more supportive of funding measures. I don't want to say that that's specifically true about Salem at this time, but those are general sort of voting patterns that we see. I'm not sure if that really answered your question, Commissioner or Councilor Hoy, but that's sort of what we see. All right. So then we presented voters with the buckets of spending in large categories. We're going to get to signature projects in a moment, but these are large categories. And we just said, knowing that this is the plan for funding, does this make you more supportive of the bond measure or more negative towards the bond measure? And then the yellow is sort of a neutral, or neither more positive nor negative category. I have broken these. I made an arbitrary choice to break these into 3 tiers. You might look at the data differently. So part of it's just space issues. I want to make sure that things are big enough for us all to read. But I sort of see a top tier of the 132 million for street maintenance and improvements. You're at 64% more positive, just 16% negative. Second, 26 million to replace aging engines, fire engines, and equipment. Notice that this is the equipment measure and not the purchase of land, because there is a significant difference in the 2 fire issues that we asked about. Okay, but here you were at 63% more positive, just 15% negative. And then the 25 million for sidewalk maintenance and pedestrian safety improvements were at 58% more positive, 20% more negative. So these are distinct buckets. One might think of just these are 2 transportation elements, and they're both in my sort of cutting of the data in the top tier, and then this equipment for fire also in the top tier. The second tier, you see, the positive marches down a little bit, the negatives increase a bit, but then the 29 million for park upgrades in neighborhoods across the city, 58%, 20% negative. 8 million to purchase land for future libraries, affordable housing, 55%. You can see these negatives increasing, and the 14 million to purchase land for future fire stations. So here you see that fire stations, the equipment, strong support, and future lands, you have a majority seem more positive, but you get, bigger negative as well. And then the third tier, 14 million to purchase land for future, excuse me, that's in here twice. So again, this is a work in draft. I apologize for that. 18 million to upgrade critical computer systems and cybersecurity, just a lower priority, 48%. This is consistent with the previous survey work. And then the Civic Center really is the lowest priority, just 35% saying it's more positive, and you see 33% more negative. That one does sort of stand out on its own. These are similar to the sorts of results we've seen before. So I doubt they're a surprise, but clearly transportation, making sure that that is funded and then also communicated about is a priority for voters. The fire equipment, also a high priority for voters. And these voters aren't really it's not like lots of voters are saying that they're more negative. Even the Civic Center, we're at 33% negative, which is significantly more than anything else, but it's 33%. It's not 50 or 60 or 70, right? So it's not that voters are saying they're rejecting it. It's just, they want to know more about some other things. So once we told people, here are the buckets of spending, we asked again, now that you know more, where you're at. So now we're at the 60% yes, 32% no. And here, Councillor Hoy, we got that nice 32% certain to vote yes. So as voters learned more about the bond package, that it's not going to increase their property tax rates, then it's going to fund projects that they prioritize, we see support march up. 60% is the number I'm looking for. I want to see a number at 60% by the time voters are informed. That's, thinking about a campaign moving forward. If there were an opposition campaign, it's just easier to get people to no than it is to yes. And so I want to see a healthy yes vote sort of at this stage, knowing that if an opposition campaign emerged, that we have a little bit of a cushion. And so now we're getting to that level of support that I want to see. Then we got into signature projects. So those were large categories of projects before. These are into more specific elements where we tried to identify the specific projects and the location. Okay, so each one of these, you'll just note, has a geography in South Salem, in Northeast Salem, in West Salem, right? We tried to define for folks where these things are. And then the specific projects, so Pringle Road and McGilchrist Street to improve traffic flow and add new bike lanes, improve pedestrian crossings. And then it's the same scale as before. Does knowing this make you more supportive or less supportive? These are the transportation elements, just to preview, then parks and then land purchases. You'll notice that once we got into specifics, the more positive drops a little bit. The more negative increases a touch from what I shared before. I think it's just what's happening here, that the positives decline a little bit. It is marginal, but I need to dig into the data a little bit more, but I think if you live in, say, North Salem and you're hearing these projects about South Salem, that's not the thing that's going to make you more positive, but it may make you much more positive if you live in South Salem, right? But all these do pretty well. There's, again, the red here is quite small, but the highest is the upgrades to Pringle Road and McGilchrist Street. With parks is actually different. On the specific park projects, we actually see, the positives increase a little bit relative to where they were in that general bucket question that I showed a few slides ago. But here, West Salem, new playgrounds and equipment, picnic shelters, renovate softball fields, and Minto Brown Island and Orchard Heights, that gets the most, but you see that these all do pretty well. Again, the negatives are quite small. And then in land purchases, the two that we asked about, the one that does not quite as well is in the Northeast in Northeast Salem and South Salem purchased land that we used to build 2 branch libraries with affordable housing once funding is secured. Here we're at 55%, and you see that negative increase to 28%. Again, the green outnumbers the red quite a bit. What we did see in the previous survey was one that voters, and we see it here too, voters care a lot about homelessness. They identify it as the top priority. And when we asked about opportunities to fund things that might support addressing homelessness, most voters are behind that. But about 1 out of 5, 1 out of 4 voters, something in that range, do push back, right? So, and we see this here where the strong negative, once we talk about affordable housing, that increases. And that's just a pattern we've seen. Most voters are supportive of it, want to see it, but you have a stronger opposition to it as well. It's not a majority, but its strength exists. And that's just a pattern we've seen in the last couple of bits of research that we've done. And then we did another test and said, now that you know about these signature projects, where are you? Basically, we held steady, right? We didn't pick up support, but we also didn't lose support. So, you know, people, when they learned these different types of projects around the community in specific areas, support held. And then we can see some changes. So this is from the initial informed test, that one where we said, hey, tax rates aren't going to increase, to this test after we gave people all this information about the types of projects. Support increased in 6 out of the 8 wards. It decreased in Ward 4 and Ward 6. Not big differences, particularly in Ward 6, not a big difference. And Ward 6 started at the highest level. But I wanted to call out that in case there's anything that stands out to you. Maybe you have an explanation for it that would make sense. But we did see that small shift. Again, we're dealing with small sample sizes here, but that pattern might be meaningful. Just a couple sort of broader perspective questions. We asked people if they agreed or disagreed with the statements. And this one is a little concerning to me, I'll say. The area of Salem where I live will get its fair share in investments from this bond measure. Less than half of folks agreed with that statement. Okay. And the bond is focused on the most important public infrastructure needs. Less than half agreed with that as well. So these are some worrisome elements. Councilor Hoy, and if there's other people who I'm not calling on, I can only see so many people at a time. So Councilor Hoy, and then if anybody else needs to jump in, please do.
Thanks, John. I think that there's a culture in Salem where every neighborhood thinks that they're not getting their fair share. Mm. I think it's certainly true in my ward. I think it's true in Jose's ward. I think every ward has like, there's just like this culture thinking that the other wards are always the ones that get the most services, no matter which ward you're talking about. Mm-hmm. I just think that that's kind of a culture here. Mm-hmm. So these numbers don't actually surprise me.
Okay. Well, I did looking at whether or not you're getting your fair share. That's this light green bars here. You can see the differences. Ward 2 particularly didn't feel like it was getting its fair share. Ward 4 didn't think it was getting its fair share. And if you spend a sort of a few seconds looking at this is the dark green is the support. And there is this connection between, this correlation between feeling like you're getting your fair share. It's not 1-to-1, right? There are some, like there's a bigger gap in Ward 8 and Ward 7, but the general pattern is that, wards that felt like they're getting their fair share were also more supportive.
Councilor Stapleton has her hand up.
Oh, please, I can't see that, so thank you.
No worries. Thank you, John. I know that there are, I hope I'm going to say this right, but I think we also have some pavement R&R projects, and we have, right, all of those sidewalk projects. So my question, I guess, is in the survey, were folks led to believe that the only transportation money that was going to be spent were some of these big projects?
So what we did, the large buckets of money, like that $132 million for transportation, for example. I can't remember exactly like roads and streets or how we framed it up. I'd have to go back to the slide. But then we looked at the largest as it was defined now, the largest dollar projects, and describe the specific places where they're going to be and the specific things that they would do, including pedestrian crossings, bike lanes, pedestrian paths that connect different places. So we tried to be specific on the signature projects that currently sort of the most dollars are allocated towards. That's for transportation and that's for parks. And does that answer your question, Councilor Stapleton?
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to pull out is that maybe not all of the projects were well represented. And so, folks hear about McGillcrest, and of course, I never drive on McGillcrest, right? And so then you start to almost exaggerate that pitting against ward in that kind of way, instead of talking about more of the projects that are lesser items on the list, but also will increase the quality of life in Salem for a lot of people. So I'm just trying to tease that out. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a good observation, and I think you should look at the results in the context of that, thinking about, hey, what did we ask about specifically, and how might that have shaped people's minds, and what didn't make it into this survey, and I can't speak to how that would have changed people's perspectives, except like we know that transportation is a priority, and we see that some specific park things are a priority, and fire equipment's a priority. But also your community outreach should inform how you think about these data, and other sorts of things you're hearing from voters should inform this as well. And it's a fair observation. Yes, Councilor Barton.
Thank you. This is really, really good. I think what I wanted to say is voters are going to support projects where they see that alignment with their priorities. And I notice with the parks, it goes into much greater detail so that they really understand that it's going to picnic shelters or new playground equipment rather than just kind of a broad street or something. So I think that's what kind of causes these to be much more positive. It's just because they know what they're going to be paying for.
Let me, I don't want to cut off questions, but I'll just a couple other things. One is we asked gave people a few statements and asked them if that was a good reason to support the measure or not. So these are the three we asked about. The measure would fund critical public infrastructure improvements without increasing property taxes. 70% said that's a good reason to support the measure. 37% said that's a very good reason. Another one was most of the money we raised from this measure would be invested in repairing and maintaining Salem streets, bridges, and sidewalks. 66%, 2 out of 3 voters say, yeah, it's a good reason. And then if this measure passes, the city of Salem commits to not asking voters to support another bond measure until the community improvement bond is spent down, which should be about a decade, a little bit less there. So like you can interpret these, or you could utilize these different ways. One is just to understand how voters are thinking about the measure, and then another could be just, assuming you decide to move forward, just how would you communicate about it? What would be the priority sort of messaging that you would use? And then lastly, we gave people the sort of this one, I mean, it's a package. We asked about different things, but a particular sort of set of spending priorities. And we asked about them. And then we ended the survey by saying, there's another way this could be done. We could fund, we'll look at it here. We could allocate, this is the language, allocate $10 million to get a dedicated bike lane separated from traffic. And then this is the way we framed it. We framed it as not increasing the total amount of the measure, but it would reallocate some funds from other things. So instead, the funds would come from reductions in spending from other public infrastructure projects. I want to acknowledge there's lots of ways we could ask about this. And this was the one way that we did. And so this is with any survey research, you got to sort of think of it in the context of all the data that's here, the research that was done in the past, what you're hearing from the community. Framed this way, support went from 60% to 49%. We asked the question, we kept the, Asking the question this way allowed us to follow up so that these were all comparable to each other. Okay, so 60% to 49% with a similar question. I would encourage you to interpret or read this data, and this should be gray, I'm sorry, it shouldn't be red. Interpret this as dedicated bike lanes just aren't the highest priority relative to other things. Okay, but I would not interpret this to say if dedicated bike lanes at $10 million are in the package, that the measure loses 11 percentage points. I just would say, hey, be clear-eyed that if you emphasize dedicated bike lanes, that's not voters' highest priority. And then as you're making policy choices about what to include, what not to include, if other things that might get reduced that might affect how voters think about it, and that might be a worthy trade-off as you move forward. So not the highest priority, kind of framed the way we framed it. It did reduce support some, but I would say look at this in context of the overall results and the other sort of community information that you have. And then you can see where support decreased the most when we included this bicycle question. And I see you, Councillor Hoy, I'll get to you 1 second. I'll just sort of call out that, you know, Ward 3 and Ward 8 was where the biggest drop was. I don't have a good explanation for why that might be. I'll look at the data more. You might have an explanation, but that's where we did see it. Yes, Councillor Hoy.
Thanks, John. I don't know if you watched our last council meeting, but we had a conversation about this very question. And we had I think there was some pretty consistent consensus amongst the council that we didn't think you ought to ask it as a question about a change to the measure, because the measure hasn't been changed because it hasn't been formulated yet. We're still working on that. And so it almost seems like we pushed people to say, like, look, here we go. We're going to take money from something in order to fund this, which that's what we're doing with every one of these areas. We're going to either fund parks or we're going to fund roads because it's $300 million and we're going to keep squeezing the balloon until we settle on where that's going to go, right? Mm-hmm. There hasn't been we haven't settled on where the 300 million, how it's broken up. Mm-hmm. And so I'm pretty frustrated that we took this one issue and put it in terms of a change when really it's all just part of a conversation.
Councillor Stapleton or others?
Sure, I'll go. Yeah, I was really disappointed in the question as well. I think what the question that was asked did was it pitted folks who ride their bike against folks who drive their cars. And I think that is a long-term cultural struggle that alternative forms of transportation are going to have to come up against repeatedly. And there are ways to ask the question that does not, kind of bring that tension to the surface and bring that kind of defensiveness about, you're taking away something that I use to give it to somebody else who uses a different mode of transportation that I don't use, right? And so I am not entirely sure how to hold this information, mm-hmm. and how to use it to move forward. I guess, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Sure. I would just say that what we see here, I wasn't at that meeting. This request to include this question came kind of at the end. We tried to make sure that we could get some information with this. So that's just some context. I would say your observation, Councillor Stapleton, about how people talk about bikes and other modes is consistent with what I hear when I'm doing focus groups, so that people do talk about it like that. I would also say that that's the way people are talking about it. And that might be the way that people who are opposed to this bond measure or opposed to this particular way of spending the dollars might talk about it, and that you might interpret this data to say, well, okay, then let's be clear-eyed about how we're going to talk about the choices that we make about the funding allocation for this bond. And I don't necessarily think it's the highest priority for voters, meaning that when they're looking to vote for yes on this bond, they're going to be looking for some of those big ticket things that I suspect are going to be in there. So I guess I would say I agree with you. The voters are probably, some voters are going to talk about it that way, and that might have an effect with some voters. But I don't interpret this to say that, you couldn't include it and still pass this bond measure. Councilor Varney and Councilor Gonzalez, I'm not sure who raised their hand first, so I will.
Well, I wanted to mention Ward 8 is very hilly, and I have straight up and down darn near. And I have gotten quite a bit of pushback from residents in Ward 8. I represent Ward 8. So okay. You were just kind of asking what that difference might be.
Yeah.
And when it comes to bikes, I see that polarization, as you were talking about with affordable housing, for example, where it's one of those touchy areas where you're at one side or the other. I'm not really wild about the question either. However, what it tells me is what to focus on or not focus on in the ward in terms of messaging.
And Councilor, I'm not sure if I should be leading these questions, but
go ahead.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Yeah, thank you, John. I don't know if you're going to get this, but you mentioned it earlier. How does a campaign that's pushing against the bond, what is the average effect of that? Because right now we're assuming, I don't know if these questions are assuming there isn't going to be anybody pushing back. I think there is going to be. So how do we prepare for that and not be blindsided and take that into account? Because it sounded like at certain points you were a little nervous, with the numbers we were getting, just asking the questions. So.
Sure. Well, I mean, this survey isn't intended to try to get at that communication. We didn't test any opposition language, for example. So to try to answer your question, but do it from a perspective of other things we've seen with funding measures. One of the great advantages with this ask that you're making is that it does connect to community values and priorities, and it doesn't increase tax rates. Those are those are things that are just super strong for you. Things that are difficult is that this measure is big in terms of its overall dollar amount. $300 million, it just sounds like a large number to a typical voter. It does a lot. And so, vote in opposition might ask the question whether or not the city is prioritizing in a way that's consistent with what they'd like to see. I don't know if that will happen or not, but that may be something to say, which gets to when voters are confused, if they're not really sure what's happening or why, if they can default to no pretty easily. So that'd be something I'd be thinking about and preparing for. And then with your communication, I just look at these data and say, all right, there are lots of things that are in here. Any one of these may be very important to an individual council member or an individual neighborhood or voting group. And that when you talk to specific groups, you might want to highlight those. But in the sort of broad public communication, voters want to know that you are maintaining and repairing existing infrastructure. They want to understand that transportation is going to be addressed. And that public safety is going to be prioritized. Doesn't mean that they would vote no because the civic center is in there, but it may mean that you spend most of your time talking about the other things. It doesn't mean that they're going to vote no because IT or cybersecurity isn't their highest priority, but it does maybe influence what you prioritize in your communications. How the bond is packaged together, that's a policy choice that these data can help inform. But those are, Councilor Gonzalez, some of the some of the themes that we see in local funding measures. Is it tied to the priorities? Does it increase taxes? This is definitely tied to the priorities. We can credibly say it won't increase their taxes, but it's big and it has lots of elements, and that means that voters might naturally ask more questions. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, but.
Virginia?
Thank you. You brought up something that I've been thinking about lately, and that was this idea that this is a maintenance bond.
Mm.
And I'm wondering how, sorry, got the shift there. How or what people's expectations are of maintenance. You know, in one of my conversations that I had with staff over the last month or so, is that we were lamenting all of the work that could be done, right, and still needs work even after a $300 million investment in our streets and bridges and roads and all the things. And he was saying, you know, I'm driving down some of these roads that are just horrible, right? But that road's not included in the bond. And so my question that I've been formulating and thinking about is, how do people interpret maintenance and working on things that we already have, existing infrastructure, and how do the projects that we've chosen interact with that? Because a lot of the projects that we've chosen are, you know, those signature pieces, the big ones that are actually new, right? And they're not necessarily, part of them are existing, but they're actually creating more streets for us. And the fact that we will at the end still have all of these streets that need repaving. And I know, you know, the pothole thing, right? Those are things that people feel when they're driving, and it's a very real experience for them. So I guess my question for you is, how do you reconcile those differences when you are talking about maintaining existing infrastructure and a maintenance bond, you know, using that kind of verbiage and language, but yet the projects that we've chosen are more signature pieces?
That's a big question. It's as much as a policy question it is as a public opinion question. So I'll take a crack at it, but like, these are just sort of some working ideas sort of in response. And if we ask voters on any issue, do you prioritize making investments in new whatever or maintaining what you have consistently, whether it's transportation or parks or pick your thing, voters will tend to say maintain what we have. And this aligns with that. So voters will also give you a long list of things that they'd like to have done, and will not want to pay for that full list of things that are being done. I mean, that's just, I mean, you know, that's just true in politics, probably true in our own lives. And then it's just a policy. I mean, I don't have a great answer for it. It's just a policy trade-off. I think you're absolutely right that there will be some voters who will criticize no matter what you do, because you can't fix everything. And I would say, just prepare with your communications to be able to talk about clearly about the things that are being accomplished. Some of these signature projects are just not going to be relevant to some voters, but they're going to be highly relevant to others. And putting together a coalition of success means both having broad sort of community benefit and specific projects that some small group of voters are going to rally around and do the work to support. So, and then what the balance is, I mean, that's really a policy question for you all, and hopefully, you know, these data can help you make that choice. But it certainly, there's going to be some voters who say that you didn't do enough on maintenance, that you didn't touch my street. And also, you know, no measure is ever going to get 100% support. So, you know, just trying to craft a way of a policy and a coalition to get to 50% plus one is really the aim. Mayor?
John, I wondered, you see a lot of these kinds of polls, and then I guess look at the the second page on it where you look at the communications and how that's crafted. How complicated a communication problem do we have here? Because it is a lot of pieces and they're all moving at once. And it kind of doesn't matter what the pieces are. There are a lot of them. They're certainly thematic, but have we bitten off more than we can chew, do you think? Or is this just going to take a really sophisticated communication plan? Where are we here?
I hesitate to say, make that judgment whether you've bitten off more than you can chew, other than say these numbers are, we saw support march up to 60% where I want it to be, that strong support increase, that strong or certain no decrease. Those are all positive things. There's a risk, I think, of over analyzing the communication challenge. One of the projects I worked on, it's not as big as this, and it was more tailored to one specific thing. It was parks, but working with the city of Portland, their message was, and no new taxes. Right? They simplified everything down to the thing that the voters said that would get them to yes, which was the opportunity to have public benefits without having to pay more for them. They didn't spend, except with specific key audiences, those who asked questions, their main message wasn't about trying to describe how the bond worked, how everything that went into it, everything that it's going to be done. It was focusing on big priorities and that they didn't have to pay more taxes to deliver them. And so to say, Mayor, I think that the big, banner headline communications is actually pretty simple. Yeah. And there could be real temptation for those who are in the know to want to say more, but being able to, the broad communication at that level is probably what is most helpful to get you to yes. And then every community group you're going to have to talk to and give more answers, right? But those will be more tailored towards that group.
Yeah, I really agree with what you're saying. I think that as we look at trying to cut those communications events into smaller pieces like neighborhood groups or ward groups or things like that, you can lose track of really all that's fundamentally important, that it almost doesn't matter what you've got right now as long as you can talk about it in terms of no new taxes and those larger issues. And then in the local area, like in Mickey's area, talking about Marine Drive. It's Marine Drive and no new taxes. You got a really killer combination there. Are we going to be, was there anything here that struck you we can't tie in together into those kind of thematic, whether it's bike lanes or libraries or anything else, that we can't find a way to tie that stuff together? Could you see those thematic kinds of issues that we could work with?
I hesitate to give a declarative answer, but since you're asking, I'd say no. There's nothing that stands out to me as this is the vulnerability.
Okay.
If you want to call things out, Civic Center, that's going to be a harder one, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen that that's not new. You've seen this across time. We've done different research projects for you. There's nothing new about that at all. That's a harder one. And then I don't know enough about any of the particular signature projects, if there is a reason for a group to become organized in opposition to it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I think
So
we've talked about it a bit to kind of understand. We haven't put one of those together, and we haven't done a 12th Street, which is one that really badly.
And then I'd say, at the risk of speaking out of school, and if I am, then I'm going to apologize ahead of time. If a divided council, and I'm not saying that it is, but a divided council would make it very difficult for this to succeed.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. What's next that we need to do today?
Well, before you move on, I'll just say
I'm sorry then.
this was I threw some slides together very quickly. I apologize for some of the typos. We'll get it all cleaned up, and then we're going through additional analysis. So if there are things that emerge, if you want to, I don't know, share what the appropriate sort of pathway to get that information to me, if it's through Courtney or some other means, like we are interested in how to analyze the data that's going to be most helpful for you, and we're in the process of that. So now is the time to let us know.
I think it's who's our strongest voting populations, and which things do they hate the most if they get loose, you know?
Okay.
And which do they love the most? I don't know. There may be other things people like to know, but it tends to be enough to.
So the kind of thing John is talking about or referring to right now is taking any one segment of the voting electorate and comparing them against each other for different values, or whether we want to see the composition among the folks that stay at no, or composition of voters who may have fallen into a different category around the bike question, or, you know, there's a lot of different variables and ways we can, John and his team at DHM can slice the electorate and the response and the support. So the question is, of all of the variables, are there any in particular that you all would want to see in a final report, in some analysis, further analysis?
I'd like to see what people who vote think is important. I think that's real helpful, that if you can measure that voter participation, and then maybe a little bit about the demographics of that population. And if there's a killer in here, which one is it? Or is there one?
All right. We'll keep an eye for that.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, then what are we moving on to? Update on testimony data?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'll take that one, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So we did a high-level tally of testimony and other information the council has received kind of since the inception of the committee back in December. It's on page 5 of your packet. And a few caveats here, you know, if someone testified multiple times, it's counted multiple times. If someone submitted a petition, it's included as separate counts. And this is through June 7th. So we'll be updating it for whenever it comes back to council also, with those additional items that have been received, including the testimony that was included in your packet today that included a petition on bikes, I believe.
Did you do anything like, do these people live in Salem? I saw a lot of people who don't live in Salem with lots of opinions, including the petition. I mean, that kind of makes a big difference, I think, whether they pay taxes here.
Yeah, excellent question. No, we can't confirm if everyone lives in the city limits, if they're a registered voter, if they're a resident even of Salem. I can confirm there are those that aren't, just a high level overview, but to go through and try to identify those, it just isn't possible at this point.
Well, what are you going to tell us about this then, other than what you've given us and the added numbers you're going to?
You know, I would take it with a grain of salt compared to the statistically valid survey. Sorry.
I would too.
You know, it's highly engaged individuals. I think it does count. You know, they're people that want to influence the process, which is great. They're supporting their interests. But again, you're not getting a cross section of the community.
Well, I noticed it, and I think it's in the poll. We don't even have their names of people who signed it, do we? We had like first name and an initial or something like that.
I'd have to go back and check on the petition items.
I think we all have received them, and you kind of get the gist of it. But I don't know, do we need more on these folks? I mean, should there be more staff time devoted to analyzing those communications? I think we all gotten them and got our own analysis as to their relevance to our ultimate decision. Anybody? Yeah, Virginia.
Yeah, I guess my question is for you, I guess. Are you, I guess what I'm hearing you say is that the petition came in and you've looked at it, but you feel that it's not important, or it's not valid, or maybe
No. It is important, but I've looked at it, I've read it. I put it into a category of communication that I understand, that is important, I think. But I don't know that we need to devote more staff time. That's what I'm we individually analyze this kind of information ourselves. I'm just not sure how much of our staff we want to devote further to that part of we each got it. We each got to look at it. And it has its impact.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
I will say, Mr. Mayor, at this point, it's a pretty small effort to continue just for this little short period for what we've received, but it's of course up to you.
Well, if you're going to add on to it, do that. I mean, if you feel that you want to do the count, and that's no problem. I was thinking there was some analysis that might go on. So
No, just a simple tally.
okay, Mickey.
Oh, thank you. Well, I just wanted to say, yes, it is really important, but it's not statistically valid. So any assumptions you make on the data, if you try to quantify it, it's really, I mean, there's going to be so much, you can't count it as a sample of the population, is what I'm saying. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. That's okay. What else you got?
Well, thank you, everyone. The last item is really, we're turning over to kind of your conversation and consideration about the current steering committee recommendation. So that's what we have so far is we have the steering committee recommendation, and then we have the council conversation in the work session, and then the follow-up council meeting. And so there's a memo on the last page of your packet. It's just 2 pages, and it's kind of trying to summarize some of the input that we received from council. So for example, we understand that there was a Ward 7 sort of miss as it relates to streets and sidewalks projects. And so we heard 2 different kinds of ideas that might step in and cover the Ward 7 sidewalk gap, literally and figuratively. Davis Road was one of the projects that had been referenced that we could add to the streets and sidewalks portion to get a Ward 7 project. And then the other one was the Madrona Avenue sidewalk. And the costs of those 2 projects are listed in the memo. The other conversation that council spent quite a bit of time on was whether or how to add some bicycle infrastructure dollars to the bond. And so there's a summary here of some options for how we could potentially do that. There's expanding outreach on 3 existing projects in the bond to see whether or how there's interest in adding some bicycle facilities within those projects. So those are things that are already in the bond, just changing our approach to outreach as we get closer to design. There's a Winter Street Bikeway project proposal and a Union Street Bikeway project proposal. And then as part of your conversation in the work session and then subsequently in the council meeting, you had discussed some ideas for potential drops. So as you know, we've discussed many times, we're aiming at that $300 million number. So an ad for Ward 7 or an ad for bicycles means we have to take something out. And so we had heard you speak of possibly taking some Peace Plaza improvements or the bridge railing replacements out, maybe reducing a sidewalk infill or a safer crossing bucket. And so that's just what you see here is a summary of the things that we had been hearing as part of your discussion. And then the time is really yours to determine what you might want to do with that, if anything. So that's what we're doing today.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Councilor Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Courtney, I didn't understand what you meant on item A, expand outreach at Pringle, Fisher, and State. I didn't follow that. Could you kind of go over that again?
I can start, and then I'm going to beg Peter to jump in. What I know about about streets and sidewalks design projects is that there's a pretty significant outreach effort for design once we have a project identified. And what I believe is there are already bike lanes imagined in those projects. And the question would be, how can we fit, whether we can fit as part of the design conversation with the community around that project scope, what we could do for bicycle separation. Peter, did you want to please correct me?
Yeah, no, I think that's it. Thank you, Courtney, and thank you, Councilor Hoy. We have done this kind of thing before. There's a couple of examples on, I can't remember the name of the street right now, but it's a pretty steep hill, and you know, we ran some process when we started to design. We started running a process where we there was only so much room, and it would have cost a fortune because it was on the side of a hill. So we provided a bike lane in the uphill direction, but not in the downhill direction. So the sidewalk was on the downhill direction. Since you could go faster downhill, so steep, then there was no need for a bike lane. And you know, we engaged the neighbors, we engaged the neighbor association, ultimately came to council to get approval for that. So that would be one way to address this issue. That, for example, on Pringle Road, you know, there's a standard cross section, right? It's one lane in each direction, a center turn lane, 6-foot bike lanes, curb, planted area, and sidewalk. Within that area that we're going to acquire that right of way for, we could make some choices about moving the curbs over, and instead of planting area, do a buffer in between, or we could take one side of the street and make it a 10-foot sidewalk rather than a 5-foot sidewalk and make it a multi-use path. So those are the kinds of things that we could do really for virtually no additional cost, but that's not the standard cross section. So those are the kinds of things that we were going to engage those neighbors, the neighbor association, the council to say, hey, we could do these things. You know, Fisher Road is a lot tighter. We could acquire a little more right of way. We could make one of the sidewalks wider. You know, we could do some things. So those are the kinds of things that we could do. And that's what we mean by some additional process. And we've had that kind of experience before.
Okay, thank you. That makes much more sense now. I get it. It's kind of like a value engineering based on the specific project.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. Right.
Got it. Thank you.
With a lot of community engagement, though. That's the difference.
Right. It's not just among us for like we do for for value engineering.
So, anything else? What's our timeline? What are we doing today, Courtney, that you need to have done?
Well, I think that we are currently under direction from City Council to return June 13 with an update on the report you've just had from DHM regarding the poll. And we were also to return with the summary of that testimony that we've received so far. And then I'm not certain, but I had an impression that we also wanted to try to bring back a decision about what is in the bond. And so we were planning to use this time to make adjustments to the bond and then present to council on Monday night as an addition, any of the adjustments that you wanted to make as a steering committee in recommendation for the council to consider. And if that feels too aggressive, we could certainly defer until the 27th of June. But again, we are stuck with a July date if we are aiming still for November of this year.
So what is the baseline on this right now? What do we have that's ready to go? I mean,
The baseline is the steering committee recommendation from April. I can't remember the precise day. I feel like it was in the middle. That steering committee recommendation is the $300 million. And I think, Josh, in 2 seconds, you could pull up the pie, but it's got the 157 for streets and sidewalks. That 157 is the piece I think that's in question. It's how or whether we want to accommodate a Ward 7 project, and how or whether you want to accommodate a bicycle component. And if so, which projects would you recommend that we defer to a future phase of development, or even just leave as a breadcrumb for should we have adequate resources as the bond progresses over the next 10 years?
Okay. Well, to set up a base to talk about from, that we can move on, even if we moved it forward here, we could work further with it at the council, would be to move forward to the council then. So we're staying on a timeline. It's just to keep this thing moving. That initial recommendation you described, what could you describe that again for me, Courtney?
Well, right now we have a steering committee recommendation for the bond package.
And that was passed.
That was passed by the steering committee in April, and it's on our website right now. I don't remember the precise date. It must have been at your last meeting, which is in the packet.
And that's all we need right now?
That's what we have.
Okay. I'd move, we just move that recommendation forward. Now, it's open for, if you want to second it, we can use that as a baseline to amend, but we're keeping that all I'm looking for is a way to keep the process moving forward.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, so that would allow us then to have a document on the floor today. If everyone's okay, we can move it forward, we can amend it. And that then will go to the council. At the council level, at the next meeting, you'd be able to amend it or move it forward toward that ballot measure date. It keeps us moving along on this thing, and it contains the vast majority of the stuff we know will ultimately be in whatever ballot measure we advance. So any discussion? Yeah, Virginia.
Thank you. I actually had a couple of questions, and I hope this is the right time to ask them about the two options that staff put forward in our packet as the Winter Street Bikeway and then the Union Street. Is this a good time to ask questions about that?
Yeah, you're welcome to.
Thank you. So the Winter Street Bikeway, it talks about adding buffered bikeways or protected bikeways. I think it's buffered. From D Street to Union. And I believe that is about 2 city blocks, if I am remembering that. I don't think it's split up. It's an extra long block there. And I believe the budget for that is 6 million. Am I right? And I guess my question there is, does that connect anything? And I think, I know the answer to that, and it doesn't really connect much.
Okay, but do you want to move it forward, or how would you like to handle it? What do you think?
I just have questions about staff's proposal for that. And so my question is more in tension with the bike lanes on Winter Street. Are they a part of the Winter Maple Bikeway plan? That's my question.
Okay, great. Peter, you know? You're off.
I'm sorry, I clicked, but I didn't click hard enough. The whole idea of proposing additions, I think the idea is to just, we've worked on Winter Maple, we've gotten it started. It needs more work, so it really is just adding to Winter Maple.
So is it a part of the original Winter Maple Bikeway?
I believe that it is.
Okay, I was under the understanding that to complete the Winter Maple Bikeway, we had some traffic calming devices that needed to be installed along the way, possible pavement R&R, but I did not see anything about buffered bike lanes within that plan. So I'm just wondering how these two things work together.
All right, Council, I don't, I unfortunately do not have the Winter Maple family-friendly bike facility in front of me, so I'm not an expert on it, but the intent is the intent of any monies from that from that memo would be to bring to a greater degree of completion the family-friendly bikeway.
Okay, and does it also include repaving this section?
Yes, if it's for $6 million, it would include, a lot of that area. The pavement is in terrible shape, so really to allow people to bike safely, it's about they all are, the State Street project, all of these projects all include repaving.
Does it get you to the Capitol and through the Capitol toward the hospital? Is that the continuation of that thing?
No, in fact, I'm getting a note from
Mine another.
But Julie is obviously listening in, so let me just read her note here, if I may. Yeah, so the buffered bike lanes are in fact in the Winter Maple bike plan. So, I'll thank Julie here online. So it's a portion of it. So no, that piece would not get us all the way.
Well, okay.
If we could just pause for a moment, we're talking about a number for the Winter Street Bikeway that is not featured in the packet of materials. The packet refers to a 3 million ad that has the buffered bike lanes from D Street to Union Street. So just to be clear, because if the ad is the Winter Street Bikeway, then the solution is only finding 3 million from a different project. So I just want to make sure, because 6 is a bigger bite. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Hoy.
Thank you, Courtney. That was exactly my question. Are we talking about 3 million or are we talking about 6 million? And are we simply talking about furthering the Winter Maple Bikeway? Are we just going to get farther or closer to completion by adding whatever amount we get to it? Is that the intent? Because it kind of seems like we're talking about 2 separate things and I'm not really clear what we're talking about. I would love to know, is the 3 million mentioned in the memo, is that going to complete the Winter Maple Bikeway? Because I would love to complete it. Is the 6 million going to complete it? And if it's only if it's 3 million only gets us what this memo says, that's 2 blocks worth of buffer bike lanes for 3 million. That seems like a lot.
Yeah, it's a chunk, but there's the whole north end, that's like another 4 million. So this whole thing needs a lot of work to put in everything that the bikeway requires. That's in the plan. But 3 million gets us. The idea is that it would get us more, closer to completion. On a project that's, we are all excited about, and it just needs money.
Okay, Councilor Hoy.
But my question is, how close does it get us to completion? Does it actually, like the mayor was asking, does it make the connection? Do we actually make a connection somewhere where we have, as opposed to standalone pieces, do we have more of a connected system with this $3 million?
It connects. It brings us. It makes a connection to Union Street, and Union Street will come under construction here next year.
Right.
So which then connects to the Union Street Railroad Bridge and across. So yes, it does make a connection. It makes it safer. But there would still be missing pieces along Winter and Maple Street, and then to the north, and then the connection to the north to up to Cherry Avenue and beyond.
In thinking back on this, and I'm trying to remember the details, I've always been kind of interested in the Union Street portion of this discussion. That will be completed next year. We will actually be able to get from Inglewood to the park on bikes on safe.
Well, you'll get so Union Street, what the Union Street project will do first and foremost, I know this is near and dear to Councilor Stapleton's heart, is we'll get the signal on Liberty and Union so that you can cross there. So now all of the big intersections are signalized, where there's the most traffic. And it gets us east, I believe, to Church Street or maybe to Winter Street. And then this would then give us the improvement, from there north. But from there south, now there's less traffic on Winter Street, and there isn't a lot of traffic on Winter Street, but it gives us these improvements that makes it even safer for towards our goal of having this family-friendly bike lane.
Okay. Councilor Hoy.
Thank you. So it says, I'm reading the memo again, and it says Union Street at 4.3 million, starting at the west line of Summer Street and wrapping around onto 12th Street, ending at the intersection with Marion and 12. But what I heard you say is that that's going to give us a Liberty Street signal.
No. I'm sorry, Counselor. That's the 2023 project. That project's already funded.
Okay.
So what the $4.3 million project is to extend it to the east.
Okay. So I would be more inclined.
Project ends.
Okay. My priority would be to do this Union Street connection there at the east end, because that's really a missing piece, is connecting Union Street over to the promenade and Marion and 12. To me, that's a critical connection in our system.
Been working on that since I was a counselor, trying to get that far. It's really,
Yeah, to me, this is like, we have to add this connection on Union Street in my mind.
Yeah. Counselor Stapleton.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Councillor Hoy. I think that is critical. I also feel that there is a missing link between the pedestrian bridge and that connection over towards Liberty, right? Because after Liberty, with the project that's already funded for next year, is where we get those more protected bike infrastructure on up to Winter Street. But really, there is so much traffic, cross traffic in those 3 blocks that, in my opinion, any kind of project to deem Union Street family-friendly bikeway complete needs to address the safety concerns for folks who are riding bikes within those 3 blocks from the pedestrian bridge across Liberty Street. And it's a meeting that Councillor Varney and I had with the West Salem Neighborhood Association and Can Do, talking about this exact problem, where it is not safe to get from the pedestrian bridge to the family-friendly bikeway. And this is at the heart of my motion at council. There are these 2 or 3 block sections that are not safe for family-friendly. That is, it's not family-friendly. And so how can we find those projects to make those links in there and really connect, get it so that people can actually go somewhere? I thought, Mayor, your line of questioning at our work session hit the nail right on the head. I can't get from one place to another in any kind of safe, comfortable riding for all ages. And so, you know, that's really the heart of my motion at council. And I think the Union Street proposal that we're looking at today is really important and starts to get at what I am hoping to find. But again, I think that those couple of blocks at the start also need to be addressed if we're going to actually make this connection. And I'm not sure how I feel about the Winter Street proposal here, because I'm not sure that it is the wisest use of our funding. And I think a lot of the money on that project is going to the pavement R&R, which is critical, definitely. But how are we going to, would the money for the Winter Street proposal here today be better spent on completing the other fundamental safety features throughout the rest of the Winter Maple Bikeway, like the traffic calming centers and stop signs and the different elements that are still pending on that side of the project?
Okay. I know that's not rhetorical. You want an answer, right? Who's going to answer the counselor's question? Peter.
Well, Mayor, I mean, they're all important projects.
Right.
They're all important needs. I mean, I think that's what that's the job of this committee. You know, all these projects are there in the transportation plan, have been adopted by the council. We've provided you the information. Not sure how much more there is to do between Front and Liberty beyond the signal, but I think the project already includes some of that stuff. But if there's anything that additional that needs to be done, then or additional things that we want to do, then those are great to complete. I completely agree that the system should be completed, but in the end, I think it's really for we'll keep providing you information, and you know, we'll take a bite out of the $300 million need.
Peter, I think one of the things that I think we need to understand when we do the final, final discussion and activity on this is to understand where are we on a couple of these projects. This one, you've described enough pieces. I'm not sure I understand where it all sits, but then understanding how to just complete this one project to a family-friendly standard. What are we talking about in terms of money? I'm becoming really concerned as I listen to this that we're talking millions and millions of dollars to create a full system. Am I missing something here?
Oh, that's correct.
And
Correct.
are there areas where with a X of $1 million, let's just leave that open, you would have enough money to begin completing, this one, and this one, or is there only a this one, or is there a this one and this one? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it doesn't sound like this is going to make it with 10 million bucks. I mean, and that it does have, and I really hesitate to go into it this way, but it does have a pulled possible downside. And that I'm not sure I buy that, but we need to be cautious about it. And I think it'd be good before we get into it in terms of voting at the council level, we need to understand what are we buying here? And I'm not sure I know what we're buying here yet. Yeah, do you know what I mean? Does that, or am I on the wrong?
What I think what we would appreciate is we can provide you any information that you need. If you would like information on what is to be constructed with this project that's already, it's out to bid, on Union Street, what does the additional money to, what is exactly is the project and the cost estimate to get it around the curve and over to the 12th Street walkway, and then what, if anything, is missing on the west side. We can provide you that, but we need clear instructions on that is what you need.
Where are we going? Chris, Chris,
there's a lot of questions.
Yeah. Well, Chris, along with what you're going to ask, I'm sure, or say, could you kind of describe what you'd like to have sort of in the box for you and your new council in terms of what's the kind of stuff you need? So
thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm looking to get the most bang for the buck that we can to get us closer to a system of connected bike paths and so we have a system. And I'm ready to make a motion to fund the 4.3 for the Union Street Bikeway and take that funding by eliminating the bridge railing replacement projects on Liberty and Church and Pringle, which would get us 3.65 million of the 4.3, and take the remainder of that from the Peace Plaza improvement. I mean, and I think that gets us between the part of Union Street that's already funded, this additional funding, that gets us a critical piece that gets us clear over to West Salem, to all the way to 12th Street. It gets us connected to Winter Maple, although Winter Maple isn't there yet. I don't know. It's not as critical given the nature of the street. It's a neighborhood street that's where we don't need like we have to have this Union Street project done in order for anybody to ever feel comfortable. We have to have that crossing at Liberty Street. You're taking your life in your own hands trying to cross that on your bike. I've done it 100 times, and every time it's harrowing. And so those are just things that we have to get done. So I think we should move, just to get us closer to a solid place. Let's move this Union Street project. Councilor Stapleton, if she has other ideas on other projects, then certainly we can look at those, but this would give us one critical piece in something that is fully community vetted. We've been committed to it for a long time as a community. Let's get it in there.
Chris, thank you. I'll second that. I want to just check in with you on a possibility of adjusting it a little bit. I'd really like to see us leave that Peace Plaza in place and wonder if we couldn't count on Peter and the new city manager and that whole company to find us some SDC money, some alternative funding for this rather than take that piece out of the bond. Does that?
Yeah, I very much want to get the Peace Plaza improved. I think that that's a potential amazing community
Yeah.
place in our city, a community center, a gathering place. I very much want to get that in there. But I also recognize that it's, you know, it's a nice to have, not a have to have. I love your idea of encouraging Peter to find some funding somewhere else.
Well, maybe we could just maybe leave your motion alone and kind of pose it to the city manager and the public works director to see if they could come back when we go in front of council and give us a, hey, we got some money stashed away we think would be more appropriately used for this, and give you the opportunity to bond that work out on the, you know, let them tell us how it works. Okay, so we have Chris's motion on the floor, ready to go. Virginia?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chris. All right, sorry, Councilor Hoy. I really appreciate that. I think that this is a really important project, and I think it also is something that that you're right, that the neighborhood and that the city has all really gotten behind, and I think can be enthusiastic about us finishing the project. And I do agree with where you're taking the money from. I think that is a good piece. I'll leave it at that. I think that I have other thoughts, but since we are entertaining your motion here, I'll leave it with my agreement on that.
Any further discussion on the motion? Okay. Is there any objection to the motion? Okay, good. We'll take that. That goes to the council then, right? Courtney, this goes to the council.
Yeah, I've got it. We're putting Union Street in at 4.3, taking 3.65, the bridge railings out, and the remainder from the Peace Plaza, which brings it to about 1.3.
Yeah, and we're expecting an alternative suggestion to taking it from the Peace Plaza just to hear it.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
I thank you. I think we ought to talk about the Ward 7 street and sidewalk projects. I feel like we need to vet that a little bit, whether we're going to include one or not. I know that one of the counselors made a passionate pitch for Madrona Avenue, but then I understand that the community maybe isn't as behind that as we thought maybe they were. And then, so maybe there's a Davis Road project. I don't know if there's an appetite for including that, but I feel like we at least need to talk about that for a minute. I don't know what other people are thinking about that Davis Road sidewalk project.
I think, I mean, just my thoughts on this is we are looking at projects that have not been vetted in the neighborhood. That when they move from Madrona to Davis to God knows where else next, I think we really ought to wait until this gets some vetting or have a better understanding of what the community's looking for rather than any of us individually. I really do. I think this one was, I think the point made in bringing it up in terms of what's going into Ward 7 was certainly one that I think caught all of our attention. But if you're just, I don't think you should be dropping projects off. You know what I mean? It's a little concerning what happened there. Councilor Stapleton.
Yeah, thank you. I had the chance to talk to a few of the community members that came forward with the Davis concern. And from my understanding, earlier in this process with this committee, Davis Road improvements was on the list as a potential project. So not something that I think was kind of out of the blue so much. But maybe because we didn't have somebody from that area of town here within this community or in this committee, it wasn't able to get, pushed forward in a way that the rest of us had opportunity to kind of push forward the things that we knew about and were aware of. So I did hear from folks about Davis Road. To me, I think I've said this a million times, all of the projects on the list, the original list and the list that we have now are good and need to be done. I know that other counselors will, I think, have some concerns that we are not, considering something like Davis Road in this committee setting.
Great, then they can bring it up at council. I mean, that's wide open as well, and it would give the counselor whose ward it is, who we know is now talking to someone in these neighborhoods, an opportunity to bring it forward. And it might give us a little chance to look at the proposal that was made before. I don't recall it being on the list, but that doesn't mean it wasn't. It just means I don't remember it, so I don't know the detail of it. But we can do it either way. We can do it now or we can do it then. It gives the counselor a chance to make her case and describe what she'd like to have done based on her conversations with her constituents. But either way is fine with me.
Sounds good to me.
Okay,
If I may just interject for a
that
moment.
didn't go anywhere.
Well, I just want to notice for a moment, my perception of these conversations at council when there's a vote on the measure at the package as a whole is that Councillor Nordyke has a tendency to talk about conflict of interest and step away from the meeting as it relates to
Right.
the State Street project that's in the package. So I don't know if Dan's about to speak, but I just want to notice that it might be, I'm not sure how best to manage that, but
I
it
see
may be
what you-
challenging for her to speak.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's a
Excellent.
really good point.
And now
Mr.
Dan will
Mayor.
be more precise.
Dan?
I have some updated information. I hope Councilor Nordic doesn't mind me raising it now, but she did seek an opinion from the Oregon Government Ethics Commission, who then provided a revised opinion based on additional information, and she no longer has an actual conflict on the bond measure and will need to announce the conflict, but she can participate.
Great. So she'd be able to make her own motion on her. I don't care either way. What do you think? Chris, what do you think? This is your suggestion. What do you want to do?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we talked about it for a minute. I'm hearing this updated information from the city attorney. I feel like we can just take this to council as is. And if Councilor Nordyke wants to advocate for Davis Road or Madrona or whatever in her neighborhood, just like we all will have the opportunity to, I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
I agree. Thank you. Okay, we've got the motion as amended now. Okay, are we ready to vote then? Okay, this is to send that to the city council for their action. Okay? Is there any objection? All right, we'll move it forward then. Thank you. What else we got? Are we done? Yes?
Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Anyone, anything for the good of the order? Anything else you want to talk about? Yes.
I would be interested to hear what, when our next meeting is and what is going to be presented to us and maybe what are the things that we need to start thinking about and what you're going to need from us at the next meeting.
I think we're going to council.
Yes, I understand that, but I'm talking about the steering committee meeting. I'm wondering how this shifts after we get the project list completed.
Go ahead, Courtney. I'll let you explain.
Well, that would be really up to you about how you wanted to continue to participate as a steering committee. When we have a council adoption of the measure as a whole, our typical approach is to shift and work with the council as a whole in providing materials and information to help raise awareness about the measure. And we had been asked a bit ago to be able to prepare a slide deck for each of you to be able to take out to your constituents. Particularly, we thought it would be ward focused. And so we have that intent to do that. And once we have the measure locked, hopefully Monday night, we'll be able to prepare those materials for you. We also have some extensive information already on the website, and we've heard a couple of additional questions that we may want to build out over these last couple of meetings and conversations. And so we can certainly continue to add to that information, but typically we move to the whole council once the steering committee work is complete. And then there is a vision for, as we also do typically. There is a vision for once the measure is through November, we would then be relying on a steering committee of council, this group, or some other composition to help guide the future investments that we're making with those resources. We've had, I think, good experience and success with council committees in that capacity on the police station, on the library bond, and on the 2008 Streets and Bridges bond. So that would be the intent, would be to just sort of keep the accountability, the openness, transparency of those projects as they're planned. And should we be fortunate to have additional resources available because the economy shifts or changes, we would be bringing suggestions for how to stay in line with the ballot measure and make additional investments. Sorry, Kristen.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to the steps involved with retaining somebody to run a campaign, forming a PAC, finding community stakeholders and partners that will be promoting the package as a whole or portions of the bond package. So following approval by council, we will be shifting to the messaging and then also formulating support in the community.
Okay. Anyone else on this? So we are, I get caught up. I apologize. I had to leave for a second. Where are we then?
So Mayor, I was just recapping the process once we have a package, then shifting to the messaging and the political side of it, the campaign side of it.
Great. Well, then what we'll do is the council will have a shot at it. And that will get us toward getting it to the council by the 24th. Am I right on that?
We were aiming for Monday's meeting, the 13th. It would be an addition, a walk-on on Monday evening.
So we'd be done. And then what's happening the 24th? When are we taking it up
I don't
again?
know about the 24th, but we would
I'm sorry.
It's okay. I think it's the 27th, but I'm not keeping track of Mondays very well. But then we would be looking at no later than July 25th for approval of the ballot measure.
Okay.
The words.
So probably at that meeting on the 27th, you said we would be referring it to the city attorney then to begin drafting up that ballot measure. Is that
we could do it on the 13th or the 27th. It's up to you, but we had intended to go on the 13th.
Well, the reason I think if we can do it, it would be nice to get it done because we're going to need all the time we can get to put together we got to go out and find people to help us with this. I mean, I think we all understand the staff just absolutely disappears in many ways. When we get to advocacy, the staff's no longer here for us. So we're beginning to take it upon ourselves to put together a bond passage committee. We got to fund it. We got a lot of stuff we got to do. So to me, the more time we get, the better. But
Mr. Mayor, if on Monday night, the 13th, if council is able to decide on the projects, then we could include into that recommendation to, have staff come back with a resolution to refer it to the voters, and that would start my process on the ballot title.
Be great. Does anyone, is that okay with everyone to keep this moving? Okay. Thank you, Dan, very much. Appreciate your work on that. Okay, so we're going to kind of go on a fast track now to get this thing ready for the ballot and begin our process. And I think then at that point, we're going to really have to figure out who's going to head up this bond committee. I mean, who do you want to approach? Yeah, there's just going to be a lot of stuff we're going to have to do then. Who's going to do the political side of this? How's that going to get done? So might start thinking about your favorite campaign advisor, all that kind of stuff right now. It's going to be pretty challenging. It's going to be very fast, I think, to get this big a bond pass. So, okay. I guess then, unless there's anything else, we're adjourned. Thank you.